Kia ora koutou. Let's resume the committee meeting. I see there's been a significant drop-off, but that's okay. Those of us who are committed are still here. So the next item is item 12, which is community funding settings for the long-term plan, and I'll invite Stephanie Velvin, Community Development Manager, to present. Just take a seat, Steph. Just Leonie just wants to state an interest, I believe.
Yes, I'd like to note an interest in this item, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, apologies, Steph. When you're ready.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Stephanie Velvin toku ingoa, ko Aotearoa tū Tāwhi Hapori. I'm Stephanie Velvin, Community Development Manager. This report responds to the resolution of the Community Development Committee on the 14th of September 2022 that Council consider the scope and structure of the Strategic Priority Grants Programme during the development of the Long-Term Plan 2024-2034. Officers have prepared two options for future settings for the SPG programme and recommend option 2 is agreed and progress through the long-term plan development. Option 2 proposes refocusing the SPG programme so that funding is invested more deeply across fewer outcome areas. The primary driver for the change proposed is to move the SPG programme towards its strategic purpose and away from the dilution or broad spreading of funding we've seen over recent rounds. As we were working within the current total funding envelope in developing options, we wanted to mitigate or offset some of the potential consequences of the refocus, and that is why the proposed option 2 also includes proposed changes to the small grants and community-led initiatives programs. The preparation of these options has involved initial conversations with sector leads as sector representatives, as well as consideration of what we've heard generally from community groups about the importance of sufficient levels of funding for resourcing, particularly staffing, as well as the 2022 Social Wellbeing Forum report and reports accessed through National Community Development Leaders Inspiring Communities. However, there hasn't been an opportunity for thorough community engagement so far, hence the timing of this report to be included in the LTP consultation to seek wider sector and community feedback. While community funding is at its heart about change making for communities, officers acknowledge, and it is noted in the report, that change in the way funding is delivered can be unsettling for some community groups, and option 2 has been developed with minimising this in mind. And on balance, we considered that this would be a more effective way to use the funds currently available. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. First up, we've got the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Stephanie. Where's the call coming to change? We heard a community member, Tim from Community Services, actually saying that he didn't agree with the change. So where's it coming from?
Yeah, so the primary consideration is how can we make the best use of the funds that we have available? And we identified in 2022 that there are some challenges with the way that the SPGs in particular are currently structured. We also considered the multiple comments we've had from the sector around the levels of funding and the consequences that has for their ability to recruit and retain staff. And that is where we've come up with the proposed option.
So who's the we? Is it staff that have?
Yeah, this is officers' advice.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Steph, I've got some questions. So I'll start with some of them anyway. I'm just wondering how you think that organisations in the middle band, say that kind of 15 to 30,000, where the report suggests that they would apply to the Community Initiatives Fund, how would they get funding for current business as usual type work when that fund is only for new initiatives?
So I guess a few parts. So I think, well, our view, kind of based on the modelling that we've done, bearing in mind that we're likely to have a slightly different set of groups apply next time, as always some change between. But the modelling that we've done based on the current SPG groups, our view is that some would roll up to that above 30,000 bracket because they align really closely with those refined or refocused outcome areas. Some are already delivering sort of in that initiative space and so would fit really nicely with the Community-Led Initiatives Fund. There is nothing specifically in the policy that states that it has to be a new initiative for the community-led initiatives. It does have some allowance for operational funding as relates to an initiative. And some would likely also fit into that criteria for the small grants, which is proposed in option 2, would be up to that 15,000.
So how would we be sure that some groups wouldn't just miss out on funding altogether? Because if the size of the pie is the same and we're just carving it up differently, which is my understanding of this proposal, then in order for some groups to receive more, other groups must receive less.
As mentioned, there's always some churn each 3-year period, so there's no guarantee that groups that are currently funded would be funded in the next 3-year period, even if we didn't change the model. But we have considered that overall there wouldn't be many groups that would be worse off, and that is around changing the threshold to the small grants in particular. So there are currently 10 groups in that below $15,000 bracket, and of those 7 are already applying for small grants, and the total amount that they receive would be less than, currently is less than that 15,000 anyway.
Okay. So one of the comments in the paper is that the thought of officers is that funding fewer groups for larger amounts will provide better impact. So can you give me some, evidence, if you have it, or thinking about why you think that that's likely to have better impact than funding the same amount of groups for a smaller amount?
Yeah, so 2 things, I guess, to clarify. We're saying that funding fewer outcome areas at a deeper amount is likely to have better impact towards those outcome areas, and the consequence of working within the same total funding envelope is that there's likely to be fewer groups in total funded. Sorry, what was the second part of your...
No, that's okay. So what you're saying is it's not that there are fewer groups being funded for more money that's going to give the better outcome. It's that you're going to that reducing the outcomes means that there's, more resource for the outcomes that are left.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And in terms of evidence, sorry, was the other part of your question. So we've looked at a few reports recently produced through Inspiring Communities around different models of funding, particularly in terms of equity-based funding, and also, as mentioned, taking into that consideration the information we've had over recent years from community about the change it would make if they were resourced at a different level for their ability to deliver more consistently.
Okay, so one of the rationales for doing this is to reduce reporting burden on groups that are only getting small amounts of funding. Is there an option to have a 2-tier reporting system in the current SPG model where groups that were receiving less than X amount would have less onerous reporting requirements on them rather than everyone having the same level of reporting requirements, whether they get 10,000 or whether they get 90,000?
That is an option that we could look at. The administrative load, I guess, is one of the consequential benefits that we see from the change rather than the primary driver for the change.
Okay, so I know the Mayor's already asked this, but what is the primary driver for the change? I'm just not very clear.
So I guess to reiterate, the way that we view the SPGs at the moment, based on our recent experience, which we reported on in 2022 from the current round, is that we're having to make decisions across a really broad number of priority areas, which is the current scope of the SPGs, and that makes it really difficult to fund things in a way that we would like to fund or groups would like us to fund them. So therefore, we undertook to review the scope, and this is an option that we've come up with that we think would use the funding a little bit more efficiently.
Okay. I do have other questions, but I'll let other people ask their questions, and then I'll come back at the end if I've got any left. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steph. Councillor, the Chair actually got all my questions except for one. You mentioned before you've done some modelling in terms of how it might play out under this new model. Do we kind of have a feel for how many organisations actually might just lose out altogether?
Well, we based on the modelling we've done, we don't anticipate many at all would lose out in terms of the amount. It would just be that they'd be falling into a different bucket, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as mentioned, though, there's naturally churn between any 3-year period based on performance and based on how a group is aligning or proposing to align with our priorities. So we definitely can't guarantee that every group will continue to be funded ongoing regardless of the model that we have.
Okay, thanks, Steph. Madam Chair.
Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steph. Some questions really around I guess first to understand the language. So you talk about rebalance and refocus. So is the rebalance the money and the refocus the scope type stuff?
Correct.
Okay, great. And the conversations with communities so far have covered both the rebalance and the refocus?
We've had, really just some initial conversations, primarily with our sector lead groups, about their experiences with the SPG process. And that was very much a broad brainstorm of what are the options, how could we improve, but we haven't had the opportunity, apart from with a couple of them that would be directly impacted by this proposal, to take this back and say, what do you think? So we would hope that we would have that opportunity through the LTP consultation.
Right, and thanks for that. In terms of the goal 2 and goal 4 areas, just around the refocus side of it, my initial read of that does look like it's quite a lot narrower than what we had there before. Would that be a fair assessment?
So yes, there are fewer outcomes or priorities identified, but in terms of the groups that are currently funded, they actually all align with the outcome areas that we've chosen. So it's definitely not a case of targeting groups that we wouldn't want to fund going forward from the current set and saying we don't intend to fund you in future. We think they do still align somewhat. Well, not somewhat, but they do still align in those spaces, particularly, for example, in Goal 4, we've selected the sort of education-focused priority, so the groups that we've funded currently fit that or align with that.
Right, so is there a potential and perhaps unintended consequence that by narrowing scope we end up excluding future opportunities?
In terms of future groups?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks, Steph. Ko te pātai. I've just got one question, probably, and it's just relating to the 11.9% of grants, of successful grants that were less than $15,000. And I'm just looking at 4.2 paragraph there, and something that would help me a lot is I'm curious as to the difference between the amount that's granted in the fund and the amount applied for by those groups. And I'm wondering if you have any insight into that off the top of your head.
I don't have exact figures to hand, but we do have all of that information on the system from the last round, and so I can provide that at a future date. In general, though, groups are applying for a lot more than we're able to fund because of the breadth of the fund. I think actually off the top of my head, we had applications totalling around 10.5 million, and only able to give out a fraction of that.
All right, thank you. So then, would I be right in saying this, this differentiation or this categorisation that we've done is based on what we've granted in the past, not necessarily what they've applied for or what they have said their need is?
Correct. That's the modelling. On the back is what they've actually been allocated.
Yeah. Okay, so sorry, this has turned into more than one question, I apologise. So if, for instance, if we're looking at a group that has applied for a lot and has been granted $10,000 and they're categorised in that percentage, and then this 4.2 sort of says they'd probably naturally find themselves in the future sitting with that smaller fund with a larger cap. So I'm not saying this very well. I'm trying to say this more succinctly. No, never mind, I'll leave it for comment. Thank you. Can't be succinct, so I won't.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just some questions around Goal 4. I have some concerns about the narrowing of the scope there, so I just want to make sure my understanding of how this would be applied between option 1 and option 2 is clear. So the only goal under option 1 that's remaining, if we went with option 2, would be access to relevant information, education, or education to support more sustainable choices. So in practice, if you had a group, say, that educated people on setting up fresh fruit and vegetable gardens in their home, they would be encouraged to educate people, but if we had a group that actually went out and helped people do it, they wouldn't be eligible under our fund. Is that correct?
I mean, we would have to assess the proposal and understand the strength of alignment. That's quite a difficult example, I guess, to answer to directly. If the group was also educating and providing information through their delivery of the community garden support, then I would see that would align sufficiently.
So I guess what I'm trying to get an understanding of is why the decision's been made to move from a set of quite active, environmentally focused outcomes that we're trying to achieve to a set of more passive, education-focused outcomes. Why did we choose to go with education rather than one, for example, a circular economy with more resource recovery and less waste? Why did we choose to move to education rather than a more active
Sure,
criteria?
So it was about the best fit for this type of funding. We have other funds that cover those other outcome areas, for example, the Resource Recovery Fund, the Environmental Initiative Small Grants. And so we felt we were considering what other funding was available and also what lent itself well to this type of strategic funding, long-term funding, and also considering what works in terms of the focus upstream in terms of outcomes. So that's where the education really came from.
Thank you. And then just one final question, and it's similar to one that the Chair asked, but I don't quite understand the answer to it. So you said in answer to Councillor Hancock's questions that modelling shows next to no groups would become ineligible as a result of this funding change. If so, why are we doing it then? If the same group's going to access the same amount of funding, but just in a different way, surely this change would... Why are we doing it if no group's going to become ineligible, therefore the same funds are going to be distributed to the same people in the same way?
Yeah.
In a different way.
I guess understand your question, there's a difference between eligibility and what then might be allocated. So no groups would become ineligible to apply for the funding. And just like every other funding round, we can't make any guarantees about what will be funded at any time. It's always based on the strength of the proposal and the alignment with the priorities of the fund.
So what you're saying is, let's say you had a group of community organisations A who got 100,000 and group B that got 50,000. It might switch that group A is now getting 80 and group B is now getting 70. Is that kind of, you're expecting a realignment between different?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steph, I just wanted to pick up on a point raised by Tim from Te Puharakeke this morning about the importance to the community of SPG being 3-year funding and our other funds not being that, so it would just be a 1-year funding agreement. Do you want to comment on why that would be? Yeah, what's your answer to Tim on that one?
I guess that is what the policy settings are. Currently, strategic priority grants are for 3 years, small grants are for 1 year. To be honest, we didn't consider extending the term of the small grants within this assessment. That's a possibility that might offset some of that impact, but it's not something that we've yet explored. Yeah.
So if we're comparing the administrative load on an organisation, how would it compare to do that big application for SPG with the accountability reporting versus 3 applications, 1 per year for the smaller funds with that accountability reporting? Is that the same administrative load or?
Much less to do the annual small grants. It's a much smaller application, it's a much quicker turnaround process. The reporting is much less onerous on the groups.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave there. Thanks.
Thank you. Right, into the second round of questions. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mine actually isn't a question. I was going to move something for you if you
Okay.
weren't going to.
I've got a couple of
Okay.
more questions
I'll
to
come back
ask, but I think we're probably aligned. Okay, so I'll just go back to my list of questions. So currently, groups are able to apply for SPG funding and also put an application into the Small Grants Fund, aren't they?
Correct.
Yeah, but with this change, a group that wasn't, a group that was getting a small amount of money from each fund, they would now only be able to get money from the Small Grants Fund, presumably.
They could still apply to both. There's nothing to stop in the policy groups receiving both, though I would say, and this exists currently, it wouldn't be a change, there is a support priority in the small grants that groups which don't receive other funding from council are meant to be prioritised higher.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. So if you take a group that's currently, say, getting an SPG grant of 20,000 and a small grants application for 5,000, but they're getting 3.5, say, under this change, they wouldn't be eligible for SPG, so because their funding would be too low, their funding request. So how would they maintain their 23,500?
Well, they would be eligible to apply, and I would imagine that if a group has been awarded $20,000, it's unlikely that they would have applied for that $20,000.
They would have applied for more, yeah.
So I would expect that group would still apply for a strategic priority grant.
Okay, so this is what I can't really understand, is how we're going to fund some groups more without funding other groups less, given that the pot is the same size, effectively.
Yeah, there definitely will be some winners and losers in option 2, but there are always winners and losers whenever we run any funding round. That is the nature of community contestable funding.
Okay, so how would the timelines work so that groups, would they be able, if they missed out on an SPG, would they still have time to apply for a community initiatives fund?
Yeah, absolutely. So decisions are normally announced around March for SPGs, and the applications are received for small grants around May, and they're actually paid out at the same time because of the difference in turnaround time.
And what's the timing on the community initiatives fund?
That's open all year round.
Okay, all right. So, is the community initiatives fund fully distributed every year?
No, last year it was about 90% allocated. The year before that, I think it was around 65% allocated. So it does vary year to year.
And what's the reason for that remaining funding not being allocated?
Because it is open year round, and it's based on the projects that come to us or the events that come to us, whilst we do a lot of promotion and proactive work to get that funding into the community. We can't always guarantee that it works out perfectly at the end of the year.
Okay, thank you. Right, that's the end of my questions. Thank you very much. Sorry. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, if you aren't going to do it, I'm quite happy to move into recommendations and that we change the recommendation to option 1. And I'm quite happy to move that if there's a seconder in the room.
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you. All right, if I can speak to that.
Yep.
Okay,
absolutely.
thank you. Look, I just acknowledge the officers, and it's always good to test thinking and advice. And I think our current SPG process is a really good system. It's acknowledged by the sector, other councils, and indeed other partner funders. And we know that the community sector gets $1 when it's granted, and they turn it into 4 or 5. I mean, I'm in the sports side, and I know when everybody applies for a lot more, and they will get $1, and they'll go and look and how they can turn that into 4 or 5. I mean, that's pretty common knowledge in community and volunteer sectors. But I'm just not sure what we're trying to do here, and I think it's a gamble, it's a real risk. And I guarantee if I called the managers or the chairs of the Toy Library, Rape Crisis, City Mission and Recap and said, there's going to be a realignment. There'll be winners and there'll be losers. And I hate to say it, but some of you may miss out. I just don't, there's no safety nets for these, or funds for these other people. So unfortunately, I'm not going to buy the advice this time around, I think the current process isn't broken. And I would have heard it. I'm close to the sector, and I certainly would have heard it through the office, and I just haven't. Look, again, community groups will always apply for more. It's just the nature of the beast and the process. But I really am unsure if we're going to guarantee anything to these organisations by changing the process, upsetting a sector which is always trying to do more. It's a real gamble, and I can't sit here and allow this to happen. If we've got, if the driver's around reporting and staff admin time, then reduce the burden of reporting. I think that we can do a 2-tier system if that is the real driver. And look, I do think this is a solution looking for a problem. So I mean, I really can't see why we'd be going to change this, and I'd be interested in others' views. But please support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I do support it. I've given this a fair bit of thought, and also canvassed some views in the community. And I understand that community groups have indicated that they need more money to achieve outcomes. I understand that. But I can't see that maintaining the size of the pie and carving it up differently is going to be useful for the sector. Effectively, what we're saying is some groups will get more funding to deliver fewer outcomes, and some groups will get less funding. and maybe miss out at all. And I think, we all know sitting around the table that when the funding allocations come out, if a group has missed out entirely, quite often the council funding is essential. It's an essential part of their operational basis. And if they lose that funding, then they pretty much go under. And I don't see how that helps either the group themselves or the community sector. I would much prefer that we continue to give a small amount of funding to a greater number of organisations, because that acts as a kind of seed funding that covers their basics. Very few funders cover salaries. And if we want better outcomes, we need to fund them. So, if the aim is that we want better outcomes from the community groups, instead of carving up the amount we have differently, we just need to increase the pie. We may not have the money to do that, but that to me is the aim. That's the aim we should be looking at, not the redistribution. And I'm very, very concerned that groups will fall through the cracks, that Community Initiatives Fund will not cover some of the day-to-day operations of groups, that it will cause massive disruption and angst in the sector for a benefit that I'm not entirely convinced of. So, if I could be really convinced that we were going to get big benefit from this, that would be one thing. It might be worth the pain. But I just don't see the benefit that we'll be getting from it. So I'm not prepared to, put the sector through the pain either. And when it comes to reducing the priorities, these priorities have come from the strategic direction of council, and I'm very concerned to see, 7 or 8 priorities under sustainable and resilient city reduced to 1. So I can't really support the rationale around this change, and consequently, I'm not prepared to support the recommendation of option 2. So I'll hand over to someone else. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the Mayor for putting option 1 forward. But as well, thanks to officers. I do appreciate, wading into a fairly contested and somewhat emotive space is challenging for officers. So I do appreciate them having a look at this. Just want to briefly highlight a couple of the areas of concern that I did have around the officer's proposal. Most of them were around the refocus side of things. I was quite uncomfortable with going from an outcome-focused, diverse set of objectives to a very prescriptive set of objectives focused around inputs rather than around outcomes. So that was my greatest concern. On the rebalancing side of things, the dollars side of things, and how big the buckets are, I could have some appetite for there if there was a change in quantum, but without a change in quantum, I really struggle with a change. So I think, do keep that thinking fresh around what the appropriate limits are. As in future, hopefully we have conversations about what appropriate resourcing is, because we know there is a gap between the levels of resourcing and the levels of need in the community. So hopefully that thinking does stay fresh for an appropriate time, but would be very concerned if we saw anything that was substantially narrowing focus and becoming prescriptive. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm happy to support option 1 as well. I've refocused my question into a comment. It appears to me that what we've got here is based off what we've granted the allocations and not the actual scope of the needs or funds applied for. And so an example of kind of what I'm getting at is, say an organisation applied for 30k and got 10k, very grateful for that. But in this situation, what we're kind of looking at them and saying, well, you fit in this bracket, therefore you're better off applying, or it's a better fit for you to apply to the small grants fund, because that's more aligned to the amount that we've allocated you. And then you've got a middle ground which we could say, hey, you could actually roll upwards towards that higher SPG funding. So for me, I think the key missing part is how much did the groups apply for in the first place, and where would that place them if they were going to apply in a new system. So that's based on the allocations, not on what they've applied for, and that I think is important when you think about the officer's comments that this is a bit of a moving feast every year. Different groups apply, and that perhaps there might be a change in strategic direction, or that's those things fluctuate a little. So I do feel that sometimes we've asked for this review, or the previous council asked for this review. Sometimes you do a review and you find what we've got is actually working well, and that's good. And I do think that if the report had come back and said that, we would have had a lot of questions, been really unhappy. So I think it's been really useful to present other options and to weigh that up. And if we prefer what we've got, then I'm really happy to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with lots of the things that have been said, in particular Councillor Barrett's comments. I could have been interested in this. I am interested in it, clearly. But for me, what's missing is the sense that this is something the community sees value in. I can see academically that there could be benefits in looking at our funding buckets. We've done that already. Community-led initiatives used to be 3 different fronts, and we've brought that together. I can see there's value in this, but without a strong mandate from the sector, this is just really difficult. I think we heard it from Tim this morning. To move people from a 3-year certainty of funding, they would move heaven and earth for that. They don't care about the paperwork if they're going to get 3 years certainty of funding. To move them from that into 1-year buckets, even if the buckets are bigger, we haven't sold that value proposition, and my feel is that the community is not ready for that. This may be somewhere we get to, but my money says not this long-term plan. So I'll be supporting option 1 on that basis. And just wonder, Madam Chair, for the minutes, whether we need to expand rather than just say option 1, we need to say what option 1 is so that the recommendation stands alone. Thank you.
So we'll just change it to say agree option 1 status quo. Yeah, okay. Administrators will just do that. Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to jump in the end there. I just want to really highlight the difference in the criteria as my key issue with the change between option 1 and option 2, in particular, that although in the current moment when we have organisations that have been funded to take part in more active community roles, that the long-term shift that we signal when we move toward things, particularly in the environmental space, just solely on education, is that we shift programs that may have initially had an active focus with education as something that they do as a part of what they do actively, to programs that are primarily education, which might have an active element as a bonus. So we change the thinking and we change the way that people design programs to best access funding. And so a program that might have initially, under the funds we have currently, taken the form of, say, actively going out and cleaning up streams, might now become a program that's about not littering in the community with cleaning up streams as a tack on that they do with the surplus that they have, or the time that they don't have to spend funding the education side of things or operating the education side of things. So my fear with going toward a more restrictive model is that we, not perhaps in the short term, but in the medium and long term, incentivise organisations to provide a more limited range of services to the community due to a more limited range of outcome criteria. And that's what scares me the most about option 2. I quite like the fact that we have a wide range of things that people can apply for. I think, as the Chair said, seed funding, in a sense that we set organisations up to provide a wide range of services where, if it takes off, they can then look at accessing other forms of funding if available. But I would rather we gave that opportunity to more organisations at a lower level rather than less organisations at a higher level. So although I came into this probably quite favourable to option 2, I've enjoyed the debate and I'll be supporting the Mayor and the Chair's recommendation.
Thank you. No one online? So back to you for right of reply, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, again, just want to acknowledge the officers, and I think it's been healthy to test the scope and the structure and acknowledge the work that they've done in the report. But I don't think there's been no community mandate for this change. I certainly haven't heard it, and I'm hearing that my colleagues, you haven't heard it as well. And I guarantee if we ask the sector that we're making quite a massive change, and there's going to be some community groups that are going to get some more, but there definitely is going to be quite a few of you that are going to get almost nothing. The sector is generous, and I think they would say, no, it isn't broken, why are you changing it? I'm a fan too of spreading it wider, and I was unaware that we'd sent a signal for that narrower focus, but I do appreciate that we did ask for a report back. But I am slightly bemused where that's come from. But look, I'm picking this will get some support. I mean, civic money is the seed. The chair is right. If you don't get civic money in pretty well any project, and you're trying to do something of some value, the partner organisations go, why hasn't the city funded it? And then they start asking questions. So we do set up a lot of organisations to fail if we did go down to option 2 immediately. I think there's other levers you can play or turn to, and it's around the quantum of the funds, perhaps some other ways we slice and dice it. But again, I come back to, it's a very, very good funding process, and I just don't see what the problem is and why would we change it. We've tested it, and I think we stay with the current status quo. So please support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to vote now. And that is carried, 11 votes for and one abstention. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us on to item 13, which is update on response to homelessness. So I invite Steph to come and report. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. This report presents an update on work to develop options to respond to homelessness in our community, which was originally requested by Council through the current long-term plan and received further direction through a report presented to the Community Development Committee in March 2022. In March 2023, there was an update on this work provided to this committee, which advised that we were awaiting the outcome of a funding application made to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development. And at that time, we were hopeful that council resourcing wouldn't be needed. We did advise, however, that we would come back for consideration in time for the long-term plan discussions, should additional budget be required. Unfortunately, as the Ministry declined our application, that is the position we are now in. Therefore, this report presents 3 options developed for the pathway forward and is seeking direction on the future role of council in responding to issues of homelessness. The 3 options have been prepared in collaboration with many of our partners in this space, and I acknowledge we have partners in the chamber with us today, including Housing Advice Centre, New Waka Trust, Homes for People, Mass Trust, Manawatu Tenants Union, and Te Tihi Ora Wahine Whānau Ora Alliance. Ministry of Social Development, Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand and Kāinga Ora have also been involved in the discussions. The development of the initiatives or work streams within the options was detailed in the March 2023 memo, but in a nutshell, these again were developed with our partners and also informed by the previous work conducted by Te Tihi in 2022 around housing insecurity drivers and solutions locally, and also the Social Wellbeing Forum report. The recommended options are options 2 or 3, as endorsed by our partners, and as the options which provide the most opportunity for impact. Option 2 requires a lower level of investment and would fund the pilot of 2 mutually reinforcing initiatives, whereas option 3 requires a higher level of investment and would fund the pilot of 4 initiatives. Just before I close, I'd like to highlight 2 pieces of information which were not to hand at the time of writing the report. Firstly, we've received updated figures from MSD as to their waiting list for social housing, and the June quarter figures are at 2.8 in the report. As at September 2023, there were 621 applicants on the housing waiting list, compared to 627 in June. Secondly, some work to assess the number of homelessness-related queries council is responding to was conducted, and we found that this year officers were called to respond to around 30 instances of people sleeping rough, either in the CBD or camping in our parks and reserves. This includes at least 15 people within the CBD who appear to be experiencing homelessness. These come to council through three pathways: either self-referral, people presenting to front of house for assistance, businesses or community calling in having noticed people sleeping rough, or through staff finding people's camps in parks and reserves. In summary, this is a complex issue and there are many players in this space locally and nationally. Over the last 2 or so years, officers have worked alongside key stakeholders and identified where the gaps and opportunities are locally, what might work, and where there could be a role for council to facilitate solutions. In terms of next steps, both recommended options would require progression through the long-term plan and would include the opportunity for wider community feedback to be received through the consultation. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Steph. Just a question from me. In option 2 and 3, we talk about working with other agencies as partners. Have we scoped out that there's capacity in local partners available to do this work with us?
Yes, several partners have expressed interest in delivering the initiatives. Obviously, that capacity would come with the associated or the proposed funding as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steph. Just interested in the 30 people that are sleeping rough across the city. Which agencies are working with those 30 people? Is it just the City Council that's working with them?
There are a range of agencies involved, so those 30 are just the ones that have come across our desk, I guess. But the process typically is that we'll get notified, do a bit of an assessment of whether this is someone that we're already working with or aware of, what their circumstances broadly might be, like are they sort of in the CBD or in a park, or kind of a bit of an overview of that, and then we talk with our partners such as Luck, Housing Advice, Homes for People, Mana o Te Tangata, so there are a range of providers, and see really who's available, who's got capacity to go and do a bit of outreach, and then MSD tends to get involved a couple of days after that.
Okay, so you do go through a referral process?
Yeah, definitely. We don't tend to directly engage. It's more about assessing which provider is available and which is the best fit if they're not already working with a service provider already.
So the ones that are sleeping in front of the Regent at the moment, have they been referred recently?
Yes, yeah. We're aware of them and they're currently working with Luck, or Luck is aware of them.
Okay, my second question is relating to option 2. So do we have a total cost on option 2, or it just says 200,000 per year across 1, 2 and 3 of the LTP, but there's no total cost for option 2?
So that would be 600,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steph. So a couple of questions. The collective, what was the initial business model? What actually happened? What do people do? Because you've talked about a whole lot of partners, but what did they do?
The group of stakeholders that we're working with. So they have come together off the back of the work that Te Tihi did late last year. We got that report, and then we were notified of this funding opportunity through HUD. So we basically coordinated Coalition of the Willing, who was wanting to participate in a funding application and come together for a collective response, and that's where that group of partners have come from. Initially, the focus of that group was working through the recommendations from that Te Tihi report, their own advice and experience, other advice from the sector like the Social Wellbeing Forum, and pulling together or shaping those initiatives to feed into the application for funding. While we were waiting a long time for the outcome of the funding application, we've looked at what other quick wins could be achieved, and some of those include some mapping of housing services. There was some work started sort of pre-COVID, but the landscape's changed significantly since then, so that's one of the tasks or the actions that the group has been working on.
And what was the application to HUD? What was the quantum of that, and were other partners putting anything in?
So we applied for essentially the full suite, or option 3. In
335.
Yeah. And that again was over a 3-year period, that
Right.
funding.
On behalf of everybody or just the city?
So it was a joint application, which we authored on behalf of the collective.
Have we ever been successful with any government funding with HUD? Do you know?
Not in this space,
Okay.
to my knowledge. We were quite hopeful because we hadn't received any funding in the first 2 tranches, but that was the outcome.
And just my final question, what are the other players doing funding-wise? I note that it's 200,000 from the city. I gather others will be putting money in as well, or not? Or is it just the city?
At this stage, it's just
Just the city
the
leading?
council investment
Okay.
to deliver these initiatives. That's the additional capacity that these groups need.
Thank you.
They would be bringing expertise to the table. Yeah.
Is that the end of your questions, Mr Mayor? Yeah, okay. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Steph. Yeah, probably just to help the meeting out a little bit, and I don't know the answer to this yet, but at the last Safety Advisory Board meeting, there was a subcommittee that was proposed to look into the issue of homelessness around the city. So I'm just wondering if we could get an update on how that's actually going. The SAB meeting is tomorrow, so I haven't got the answer to it just yet. So
Sure. Yeah, there was a meeting held off the back of that SAB meeting involving some of the partners. That was more of an operational focus, looking at process. So I guess how best to access MSD services, where the edges of police scope lies, and how we can make those referral processes really smooth. So that was a good outcome of that meeting.
great, no, thank you. And I thought it was quite important that we just have that little piece of information. Thank you.
Just another quick question from me, and then I've got others in the queue, sorry. This has all come from the original submission that we received to investigate a shelter for a night shelter. This is where the origin of this, of where we're at now, started, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Yep, just checking that. And how long ago was that? It feels like it was a couple of years ago at least.
So that was through the LTP. So year
Yeah.
1 of the LTP was the sort of initial work on that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Stephanie. If either option 2 or 3 were advanced, would they be implemented in a way that would improve our chances of external investment into this area in future?
Certainly that would be the intention, that we would continue looking for other funding whilst setting up and implementing these initiatives. We've heard positive things from other councils who've gone this way about it, sort of seeded something and started looking into it, and then have received funding from central government to continue. And that has tended to be because through starting the initiative, they get better data around the nature of the issues and the size of the issues, and therefore they can make that stronger case to HUD and other central government and other funders.
Thank you. Is how much kind of firm guidance do we have from potential investment partners around kind of how we would structure it, what kind of information we need to collect, et cetera? Is it quite well defined, or is it a bit amorphous?
No, we don't have any firm guidance from other funders about what those opportunities might be, but we would definitely be continuing to advocate for those opportunities.
Is there any risk that kind of by going option 2, some of those funders go, yeah, that was nice, but you should have tried option 3, and so by us trying to save $100,000 now, we end up costing ourselves external investment in a couple of years' time? Like, what's the interplay there in terms of the quantum we might look at today versus the opportunity for external investment tomorrow?
We certainly haven't got any information that would suggest that that's a risk that's greater or lesser between either of those options.
Great. That's helpful for my thinking. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Madam Chair.
So we've got a question from Councillor Naylor online.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Steph, for the report. In the previous paper, it was outlined in terms of the SPG funding. One of the goals, criteria under Goal 3 was access to healthy and affordable housing. And looking at the list of recipients for SPG funding, there's at least 4 or 5 organisations that are, I think, to address that need. Has there been any consideration, or are any of the organisations that are already being funded via council, are any of them interested or likely to be pursuing any of the initiatives that are outlined in this paper? And has there been any consideration of utilising that partnership or those relationships that already exist and are already funded to try and achieve some of these outcomes?
So, 3 of the partners are involved in the collective of stakeholders and would or have expressed interest in delivering the initiatives. However, it's a capacity issue. So the reason why these things aren't already happening is because there's no capacity to deliver them, and so that's where this proposal to fund the initiatives comes from.
Okay. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, your comment before around this was part of the night shelter. This was part of original city mission concept, wasn't it?
A night shelter?
Yes.
I believe that they may have been involved in delivering a night shelter previously.
No, it's.
Sorry, what's the question?
So I'm
Could you
just.
rephrase?
Are they involved? Is the city mission involved in this?
Not currently. They were involved in, I believe, in the 2022 broader piece of work that Te Tuhi undertook.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Right, that's brought us to the end of questions. Thank you very much, Steph. So, look, I am inclined to move option 2, which is the 200,000 option, and I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Wood. Thank you. The reason I'm inclined to go with option 2 is because I think it's a very practical thing, because I think that will get support, whereas I think people will just not support option 3. So if it fails and someone wants to put up option 3, I'm also happy to support that. But I'm trying to be pragmatic here in that I think to do nothing at the end of this quite long road been down that started with submissions to last long-term plan about the need for us to address homelessness in the city. It's been through a feasibility study and recommendations that came back to us from Te Tihi. It's been through a sort of collective impact kind of group, putting together a bid to HUD. And now we're at this point, and I think doing nothing at this point is not a good option. You know, if money was no object, I'd be happy to do option 3, but I think we have got to be realistic. We are heading into a long-term plan that's going to be difficult, that's going to require prioritising, and therefore I just don't feel I can justify option 3 at this stage. The Housing First model is a successful, proven model that has worked well in other cities in New Zealand and, in fact, across the world. And I think that it would be well worth piloting this as an option for the city. It's a fairly regular basis now that we come across someone sleeping rough in the city centre. And some of them have chosen quite high-profile places, so it impacts, community feelings of safety, business, apart from the impact on the person themselves. So I don't feel that we should be choosing to do nothing at this point. Yes, there are other organisations that are involved in this work, and government too. But yet again, this is one of those situations where I feel that it's up to us to recognise what the needs are in the city and to deal with them in a sensible way as best we can. And, if we want to contribute to a connected and safe community, we have to grapple with some of the difficult issues. And homelessness and people sleeping rough is a difficult issue. Here's something that's been researched, been worked on with our officers, but also lots of community groups who have great, on-the-ground knowledge of how to work with people in this, situation. I think we should give it a go. So I'd encourage you to support option 2. I see everybody's queuing up to speak, so this will be good. The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I totally agree. We can't kick this for touch. It's just how do we address this? And I think I teased out that we're going to fill a massive gap because some of the partners either can't, won't, and the government aren't at the table. So if this fails, and I won't support it, I will put up a recommendation around a new option of partnering with other collective members and refer a contribution of $50,000 towards the LTP to address housing insecurity years 1, 2 and 3. And the reason I'm going to do that is because this came out of where this originally came from, I think it was actually through Councillor Dingwell, and wanting to totally fund a night shelter, which was originally born out of the city mission or city missionaire idea with All Saints Church. There's still some, I believe, some good stuff in that. But to fund this totally, or to $200,000 a year, $600,000 over the next 3 years, when we're facing, we know, one of our hardest LTPs, I just think is just filling a gap that's too much. Do we need to do something? I totally agree with the Chair that we can't kick this for touch, hence my, if this fails, my new recommendation. Some years ago, you will remember we invested, it's not a new problem, it's been there for a while. And I'm not going to say we're less than others, because I think that's been disingenuous. There is an issue. But some years ago we invested in Mash Trust, and we did a similar thing where we put social workers to assist with people sleeping rough, beggars, all sorts of things that were happening in the CBD. And we've had other campaigns with former Safety Advisory Board where we give wisely, etc., etc. So we do need to do something. But I asked, have we ever been successful with HUD? No. Where are the government in this? Yes, MSD are there, but ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We've got to get other partners around this. Why does the city continually, and the ratepayers of Palmerston North, continually have to do all the heavy lifting? We'll fill this and everyone else will walk away, guarantee you. And I think another 0.2% of rates, I just think is not the smartest way to deal with the issue. I admit there's an issue and I'm quite happy to lend a shoulder to the wheel here, but I don't want us being all four wheels. So please have a serious think about how we deal with this. It is a problem, but actually jumping to option 2 I don't think is the right one. So again, if it fails, I've got a new one which still puts us in the game. Thank you.
Councillor Wood, I believe you want to make some amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I spoke, I was just going to ask a question to yourself to see if you consider a 2 plus the Flexi Fund, which is Programme 4 at a cost of $30,000 to be included as part of this recommendation, not as an amendment.
Okay, sure.
All right. So I guess it would read option 2, but also including Programme 4, the Flexi Fund, at an additional cost of $30,000. All right, may I speak to that then?
Yep.
To the whole. Well, look, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm more than happy to second this resolution as a whole, particularly with the inclusion of a Flexi Fund, and I'll explain that in a moment. I just want to quickly touch on the Mayor's comments around a potential additional or separate recommendation. The options already exist. They're here in front of us. They're costed. That's why we've got a program and a budget here. Referring this to partners to say, what would you like to do? This has come directly from our partners in the sector, and this is what they're telling us they would like to do. So I'm not comfortable saying, oh, we'll just refer it back on them for them to do and them to fund at their own discretion. You all know housing is my passion. It's why I got involved in politics. We have to do everything we can to pull levers at different levels of the spectrum. And why I've specifically asked for the inclusion of the Flexi Fund, which brings us to a total cost of $230,000, is because that fund is about preventing housing loss in the first place. So if you read what it says there under 3.22 on page 60 of the report, it talks about the risk of housing loss due to barriers of maintaining tenancy. So simple things, cleaning costs, rubbish removal, short-term pet care, those sort of things. And that is how it not only helps. Yes, it comes at a $30,000 cost, but it comes at a saving of the cost for putting people up in emergency housing, community housing and council housing. So what I'm more interested in is the long-run benefit of helping and supporting those who are already at this stage of the housing continuum or are about to enter this stage of the housing continuum where they are homeless. So the Flexi Fund in and of itself, although it does come at a particular cost, I believe we will save money hand over fist by helping people stay in their own accommodation rather than forcing people down into homelessness where more expensive interventions are needed. So as to that program specifically, the other programs that this recommendation would include. One is for outreach services for those sleeping rough, so it would build relationships with those who are living on the streets, and we know that a large number of the people who face homelessness in our community are people with mental health challenges or physical disabilities, and so building relationships with people is how we then get access to support for them, because there are another number of programs out there which exist to support those who are homeless, but if you don't have a relationship with that individual, and that individual doesn't trust you to then go and be a part of these programs, that is where the system is falling short. So this is a specific targeted intervention that is in a practical sense hiring 2 people to go and develop relationships with those who are sleeping rough on our streets. And to those councillors who complain when we see those homeless sleeping on the cenotaph or in the corner of a business or in a shop front, this is how we take practical steps to fix it, because I've got no interest in another talk fest. I've got no interest in just going to partners and saying, well, what would you like to do? You come up with something. These are practical ideas we have in front of us that are costed that we can do today. And I'm not in favour of kicking the can down the road, and I'm not in favour of leaving people to sleep homeless on the streets longer than is necessary. And yes, I'm passionate about this topic, but this is my reason for being here. Housing is a basic human right. It is the top of the hierarchy of needs, and this is a practical, reasonably low-cost way that we can go about doing this. So yes, I mean, as you all know, and I will go through the long-term plan with you all, and I will propose programs that we can reduce budgets to in order to fund that prioritisation, because that is what a prioritisation process is. I don't just suggest we do this and don't look at reducing anything else anywhere else, but if this is as high for you as it is for me on my list of priorities, then let's refer this to the let's put this through, refer it to the long-term plan, and then we'll deal with the prioritisation as and when we get there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I actually went on the queue originally to actually ask a question, but now that we've got the Flexi Fund into the motion, I'm quite happy to support that. Because the reason is, and Councillor Wood has outlined it very clearly, homelessness and is actually a chronic issue in our city as it is across New Zealand. So it is something that, as other people have said, we just can't afford to delay on that. A half a position, I think, in terms of hoping that we might actually attract some other investment. That is something that we can try, but I think it really just delays and avoids confronting this particular issue. The bottom line is that the recommendation is that this gets referred to the long-term plan, and that is where we can actually then start to address the affordability question. So that's how I see it. So very happy to support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I quite like I think it's quite an elegant solution, since this started with a long-term plan, to intend to take it back to the long-term plan and assess people's appetite for an intervention. Now we have some costs around that. But the size of the costs around that are giving me serious pause here. And it feels a little disingenuous to put something to a long-term plan with every expectation that it probably won't make it through. But I think this is a conversation for our community. It's something they asked us to look at. I don't think they'll like the answer. I really don't. I think even if it gets through us and goes out in the long-term plan, I don't think it would survive the final decision-making. But that's maybe you can sense I'm a little torn here. I like the Flexi Fund. I think that's a sensible solution for those emergency needs where we could step in. So I quite like the Mayor's idea of a fund where we can do some partnering, but it doesn't get us the system change that we need. And so on that basis, I'm going to agree to put this to the long-term plan. But talk about kicking the can down the road, that's just kicking the debate down the road. That's all that's going to happen here. Thanks.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, likewise with Councillor One, I think I will support this. I would have preferred to have supported option 3. Certainly had appetite for that, but I might be in the minority there. Because housing is a major issue for us. We hear about it all the time, and we're not just looking at homelessness per se here, we're looking at housing insecurity, which is a growing problem and not strictly defined by those who are sleeping rough on the streets. I would love to see us give ourselves a chance to get in front of this problem, similar to the approach we took with the Youth Wellbeing Plan this morning, because it is a growing problem, and we're hearing consistently from all those organisations that are working with these people that they're not able to scale up to meet the demand for their services. And for those of us who attended Manawatu Tenants Union AGM earlier in the week, their numbers are looking incredibly grim. They're looking at having to halve their services or potentially even start to wind up their services because of a funding deficit. So that in itself leaves a huge gap in this exact work of helping people to get out of housing insecurity. What I'm torn is how much we are apparently willing to spend to grow housing development in the city, but so much less willing to exist in getting existing residents into existing houses. These are people who are experiencing housing security right now. So I appreciate we're kicking the discussion down the can, but let's have it. I feel like we're going out with a half measure, to be honest. The cost of not doing this is very worrying. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Mickled.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to come to speak on the matter. Personally, I will not be supporting this, and I've got my reasons for doing so. I don't dispute that we get an issue in homelessness, and personally, we do have some rough sleepers, in the city. We all know that, and I believe that we should be pulling every levers that we can, and I don't dispute that. And I think nobody's disputing the fact that there is a need to respond to this issue. But I think, for me personally, where I have an issue with is that we can't be doing the heavy lifting by ourselves. We can't be doing the heavy lifting by ourselves. What we are saying is not that we do not care about housing or homelessness. We do care about it. We do care about people sleeping on, on the roads or in high-profile places within our CBD. We're not disputing that people need to be housed. Nobody's disputing that. But the how is what matters, I think, here, personally. We as a council do have an influence in doing certain things. Yes, we do. I do also acknowledge that, but I also believe that we shouldn't be doing the heavy lifting. Where's central government in this? They've been giving money to Rotorua to fix the homelessness. How come we're not doing the same as well? What's wrong with our assessments or budget bids or case that we put to central government? Where is central government in this? $230,000, this is 0.2 of our rates. And personally, it's not about kicking the can down the road, but it's also just like Councillor Bowen said, it's just kicking the conversation down the line and push it to the LTP. Yes, it's true. I mean, people are going to have conversation around us, but personally, it's about the role, the how. What's the difference between our role and central government? I do believe that we can influence and have a part to play in this, but we shouldn't be doing that all the heavy lifting. And that's where I have a problem with. Where is central government in this? And that's who we should be lobbying in our city to do this, and not us doing the heavy lifting. And I support the mayor and his comments and what he had to say about this. So I will not be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with the comments that Councillor Mikaledovich has just outlined. I definitely think this is a really important area, but the initiatives that is described in this paper should not be fully funded by ratepayers. This is the responsibility that should be shared with government departments and other organisations. And in the context of the long-term plan that we're faced with significant cost increases just to cover what we already do, I'm absolutely not prepared to support this much additional investment. I would be very happy if this fails to second the Mayor's motion to look at working with partners at a $50,000 to be considered as a part of our long-term plan discussions. But yeah, we already invest significantly in housing. We've already got a significant amount of funding that we contribute to organisations that we could be partnering with. I think to me, it's a little bit like the conversation we had at the beginning of this meeting around the youth plan. Yes, we've got a role to take here, but we shouldn't be necessarily providing all the services that need to be provided in this space.
Thank you. No one else? Okay, I will exercise my right of reply. I just address some of the comments that have been made by those that don't support this. The first one is that it was suggested that the community won't support it. Well, actually, if we want to know if the community support it or not, we need to put it in the draft long-term plan and put it out for consultation, because that's the way to know if the community support it or not second guessing what the community support at this stage, so that it never actually goes out for consultation to give people a chance to have their say. That's the first thing. Second thing is, this isn't kicking it down the line. This is the appropriate process when we're about to enter a long-term plan prioritisation session. We're not going to commit to spending this money now. What we're committing to doing is to putting it in the plan along with all the other projects and plans and capital budgets that are being suggested, and then prioritising amongst all of those projects what's the most important. So this isn't kicking anything down the line. This is the appropriate process. I don't know where those remarks are coming from. The idea that this is not our role, I don't know where the idea comes from. The Local Government Act quite clearly states that we are responsible for the social well-being of people in our city. Now, to my mind, if we've got homeless people sleeping on the streets, then trying to do something about that is absolutely looking at the social well-being of those people. But it's also got a wider impact than that. Those of you who are more business-minded will know of the negative impact that having rough sleepers in the CBD has. Business is adversely affected because customers feel less safe. And so this isn't just about social well-being, it's about economic well-being as well. And when we're looking at how much it costs, we also need to look at how much it would cost to do nothing, which I would say is a good deal more. And then the concept that we're doing all the heavy lifting, that is by no means the case. All we're suggesting here is 2 full-time positions. There are many, many more positions across those community organisations and in Kāinga Ora and every other part of the city also working on housing. So to suggest that by putting this budget in, we would be doing all the heavy lifting and that other people are doing nothing is entirely wrong. It's misleading, in fact, to say that. So I do feel that when we all sat down at the start of this term at Makura Lodge and we talked about what we thought the priorities were for the city, we all agreed the number 1 priority was housing. And housing at every level. And this is something we can do for, not only for those who have got no housing, but for the community as a whole to feel safer because they're not having to walk past people sleeping on the street, which, can be intimidating for people just walking around the city. So please, let's just put this through to the long-term plan. We'll prioritise it along with everything else at that point. And I would suggest we go out for community consultation on it because this whole project came from the community originally. This is in response to a community submission from an organisation that works with people who are homeless. So I would really appreciate your support on this. Thank you. And that's carried, 7 votes for and 3 against. Thank you. Right, we'll now move to item 14, which is the additional social housing budget update. Bryce, Group Manager, Property and Resource Recovery, will present the paper. Thank you. Kia ora, Bryce.
Kia ora, councillors. Look, I'll largely take the paper as read. A couple of comments I would just make though. We are in the process of working through an expressions of interest process to go out to the market in terms of summer haze and exploring those partnership opportunities, which was the resolution that was passed. So that's in the early stages at the moment of just refining what that's going to look like, but that work is well underway. And the other point I would just make is by passing this resolution today, you are not committing any level of funding towards this project necessarily. What the resolution is saying is if council, over and above the Better Off funding and I guess determine on what those partnership conversations look like. If there is some funding to be contributed towards it, then this would be the most appropriate program for that funding to come from. So happy to take any questions.
So just to clarify, Bryce, because somebody did ask me this before the meeting, this isn't actually asking for any additional money, is it? This is about assigning the money that's already in the budget to this project.
Well, yes, mostly correct. So the resolution that was passed earlier in the year was to come to this meeting and provide an update of what that existing budget was going to be used for. Since that time, councillors will be aware that you made some decisions in respect to Summerhays Street, and through that paper it was also inferred that this budget could be used to fund some of that, although a resolution to that effect was never passed. So really it's not necessarily, it's definitely not asking for more funding, but as I said, you're not technically committing any level of funding to Summerhays, just simply highlighting this is the most appropriate place for it to come if you were going to.
Okay, thank you. A question from the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pretty well, so my understanding is we're not committing a cent because we're actually asking you to go out further to the market, is that right? We might have a developer that may want to do this for us and achieve the same outcomes, is that right?
Absolutely, and so that process will be very wide-ranging. It will canvass a number of, as wide as we can go really, to seek a partner for that. Depending on the feedback that comes back from that, that'll get presented back to yourselves probably Marchish, and at that point we'll have a stronger idea of the level of interest and what the potential partnerships could look like.
Okay, and can I get a sense that you are going far and wide? I can just recall another project which we're doing that, and we are going far and wide?
As far and wide as we can possibly go.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Nothing online? Okay. Right, that seems to be the end of the questions, Bryce, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to move this and look for a seconder. Councillor Hancock, thank you. Councillors, I think that this is a fairly straightforward resolution, which when the budget was in for additional social housing units, at that stage it wasn't assigned to a particular project. So my understanding of this is that it's just about assigning that budget line to this project. If it's not needed, then we don't have to spend it on this project, but it makes those funds available and makes the financial commitment clear. So I think it's, as the officer said, you know, this was agreed in principle previously, but there was no resolution to that effect. So in order to make it happen, we need to pass the resolution. So I'd encourage your support. Thank you. The Mayor for a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I'm happy to support this, but only on the pretense that we are exploring every avenue. So I look to the officer in the gallery and make sure that we are. I've had approaches through my office about doing some partnership work, and I think there are development partners that can provide exactly the same outcome that we're trying to do, possibly better, and it allows that funding to then be used for other projects. And so I'd support this, but only on the pretense that we're turning over every stone, because I just don't want to flop over and we're just going to spend this money because it just is sitting there. I think we can grow the pie even more and still achieve those housing outcomes that you so eloquently spoke about just before. So I'm happy to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers. Okay, I don't think I need a right of reply. We'll just go to the vote. Thank you. And that is passed, 9 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, that brings us on to the paper on the natural burial update, and welcome Kathy Deaver-Todd, Group Manager Parks and Logistics. Kura Kathy.
Thank you, councillors, and thank you for your patience and still being here at this time of the day. I'll take the report as read, but just a couple of things in comment to it. As you all know, my background is asset management, and I'm always looking for making the best use of the resources that are available. And so the option here is making use of the established natural burial cemetery at Whanganui. Preliminary discussions we've had with them is they are open to further discussions on how the Aramaho cemetery could be used as a regional resource. This option that we've put forward is consistent with the action in our Connected Communities Plan, which is Palmerston North people have access to a natural burial option within the Manawatu and Whanganui region. Appreciate this option may be some distance from the city, but it is, as I've said, the most practical option at this time. We have on a number of other facilities and services in the city looked to try and take a regional or district-wide approach. Quite honestly, councillors, at this stage, we can't afford to provide every service within our city, and this is an option that is available at present. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Kathy. Question from the Mayor.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the Manawatu District 1, that's, excuse the pun, but it's dead and buried.
Yes, it is. You're not pursuing it any further.
All right. And you obviously controlling assets and cemeteries. You have a good relationship with our colleagues over in Whanganui?
Yes, we do. When our cremator was closed down for the crematorium upgrade, we used theirs, and similarly when they had issues with their cremator last year, they used ours, and so we have a very good relationship with them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mickelad.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. I just want to ask a question in relation to Whanganui. Since it's not a certified cemetery for natural burials, does that cause a problem from a legislative perspective and that sort of thing? Because I can see there's a number of certified cemeteries, and then Whanganui is not one of them. So.
No, it doesn't cause a problem from a legislative point of view. The certification with the Natural Burial Association, I guess it's a little bit like our pool safe accreditation for our pools. It's an aspirational industry standard, and it corresponds to a number of aspects of management of the cemetery. In our preliminary discussions with Whanganui, they set up the area, but they are open to moving towards certification if that was desired.
My second question is around option 3 of the report. You've suggested developing a business case for the establishment of a natural burial cemetery at Calvin Grove for consideration for the 2024 LTP, and noting the risks that you also given here and the costs around it as well. Can this be done in time for that?
No, a full business case could not be done in time for the LTP. You'd have to make provision within the LTP for the business case. This is an option that has been put to council previously, and council decided not to proceed with that.
No, that's helpful to know. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kathy. I just want to understand what the difference between option 1 and option 2A is, given Whanganui is available under both the status quo and under option 2A. What would genuinely be different about going with 2A to just leaving it as the status quo?
It's a very good question, and thank you for the question. So what we want to explore with Whanganui is the fact that they have a cemetery at the moment with a natural burial area that is underutilised, and we have an issue that families want to access natural burial, and so we really want to explore with them, is that because we're not taking a regional approach? Is it that it needs more promotion? Are there other barriers to using it? For example, the funeral services, the travel, the transport, transport? Is it the outer district fee? What is it? So that we can come back to council and sort of explore a range of things or levers that council may be able to be involved in, with or without the funeral industry, to improve access.
Right, thank you. And this is probably because I haven't been a part of the previous decisions, but under option 3, it would cost $20,000 to $30,000 to do a business case. Do you have an estimate of what it's cost other areas to actually establish a natural burial site?
No, but we did have an estimate of what it would cost to develop one at Kelvin Grove, not to maintain or manage it, but it was in the order of 150,000, and that was about 10 years ago. Then there would be additional costs of operating it because of the clay and the conditions out at Kelvin Grove.
And what does setting up a natural burial site actually entail?
So in this particular case, if it was within the Kelvin Grove Cemetery, pretty straightforward. We administer a cemetery, which is a registered cemetery. It's a designated cemetery. Most of the works at Kelvin Grove would be remove all the soil that was in the area, refill it with suitable soil and consolidate it, and then natural burials could occur. If it was an area that wasn't a designated cemetery, there would be an RMA process. There'd also be a process to register the cemetery. And one of the things, councillors, that isn't covered in the report, but there was a proposed change in the Burial and Cremations Act. That has slowed down and is being still moving through the parliamentary system. But at the moment you can't have a private provider of cemeteries. If that was to change in that legislation, then it may be somewhat easier for a business to set up a cemetery. But most of the natural burial cemeteries are on already established council designated cemeteries, and a portion of those have been put aside.
Thank you for that explanation. So effectively what we'd be doing under option 3 is developing a business case to dig a big hole at Kelvin Grove over a particular area and then fill it with a different sort of dirt. That's what the actual project would be.
Yes, it would, and dispose of the soil that we moved out as
Okay.
well.
Why do we need a $30,000 business case for a potentially $100,000 or $200,000 project? Is there a way that we could undertake it in a more efficient manner, or is that just what we have to do?
No, and I think some of the things that relate to the business case aren't about the physical works, they're to do with the feasibility of operating it. So, for example, when Aramaho Cemetery Natural Burial Area was put aside in 2011, they were assuming that about 15% of the population would use that area, and now it's actually been 0.3% of the burials in that area. So sustainable, most of the feasibility with this one would be about the sustainability of managing and maintaining that area. The demand is very difficult to calculate, and so that's where we would need some modelling type stuff done for us, and to see at what point is it just not sustainable or not feasible. So it's more to do with the economics.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. When we're looking at our district approach and working with Manawatu District Council, did we look at any other sites as part of that process, additional to MDC's proposed sites?
Not within the area, because the council doesn't own any land within the Manawatu district that we would be able to access. And so really what we were taking the guidance from them, because they were exploring it and I guess coattailing on the back of that work themselves, but they only looked at the 2 cemeteries.
Right, so that was sort of less of a partnership and more they were doing it anyway, so we were just jumping on what they were doing.
Not necessarily. So they were going to come back to their council. Now, if they'd come back to their council and said, actually, it's not feasible for us, from a business point of view, to set up a natural burial cemetery, but in partnership with Palmerston North, and it was a district thing, it may be, then we were looking at those options, but it never progressed beyond the soil suitability stage.
Okay, thank you. And in looking at Kelvin Grove or option 3, we haven't considered any other sites within our city boundaries that could be suitable?
Oh yes, we have. We've been going on this one for a number of years. So back in 2008, this started. We have a designated cemetery land at Linton. It was deemed unsuitable. Kelvin Grove wasn't a desirable location. We did extensive exploration into Macrae's Bush. And the community came back and said no, and the concerns around that were, there was a couple of issues. One was potential flooding, but there was concern about the movement into the groundwater around there, so the community came out in opposition to that. Council considered that information in a report in 2015, and then deemed that, that Kelvin Grove was probably therefore at that stage the most practical option, and it hasn't really progressed since then.
Thank you. Just quickly, one last one. We heard from in the public comment this morning that because of the nature of the planting programs that we don't necessarily need flat land. So I'm wondering if we had in our previous explorations looked at hill country or country that's retired for planting.
We don't have a lot of that land, and we certainly don't have any land that's designated for cemetery in that location. But I know when they did explore, the Macrae's Bush was the most practicable option that came forward at that stage that wasn't designated cemetery. But certainly a wide number of sites were explored, and back then it was quite a comprehensive sort of look around. The problem Main Council is that we're not a very big city, and we're surrounded by the district, so we don't actually have a lot of the type of land you're talking about within our ownership.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Kathy. Just to explore a little bit further on that line of questioning. So when you refer to the kind of lack of suitable council land, so Kahutarawa and the area around there, Gordon Keir and the area around there, had any of that come into scope of those initial investigations?
Not to my knowledge.
And can I understand why?
I would imagine it was most likely to do with the biodiversity outcomes. One of the difficulties we have with suitable soil is that most of the suitable soil is quite close to natural watercourses, and that is the primary reason that Macrae's Bush was abandoned in the end. So I would imagine that was the case.
Thanks, but there hasn't, to be clear, there hasn't been any investigation around the Kahutarawa area, Gordon Keir area that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Great, thank you. Sounds like there's been a quite comprehensive effort with kind of partnering with other councils, and obviously you brought us an option around that. Has there been much investigation of kind of partnering more locally with community groups and or landowners that might have aligned interests here?
No, there hasn't.
And has any consideration been given towards that by officers?
No, we haven't. We haven't considered that as being a role of council or had direction from council to do that.
Thank you. If permission were given, any kind of initial comment around potential feasibility of investigating along those lines?
No, I have no comment.
Okay, that's right. Thank you. Just wanted to see how far down those lines I thought we were. In terms of some of the natural burial grounds that have come to fruition around the country, I guess, how much beyond the Aramaha example in Wanganui, how much investigation have we done in terms of understanding what kind of development pathways those other natural burial grounds have taken?
Councillors, at the last report in 2022, we talked about the Makra, the Otaki and the Whanganui cemeteries. There are currently 19 cemeteries established. Most have been established through the Natural Burial Association. They are all quite different cemeteries, and most of those cases are on suitable soils.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. No questions online? No. Okay, that's the end of the questions. Thank you, Kathy. Now, I don't intend to move the recommendation, but Councillor Barrett has got an alternative recommendation he'd like to put forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and we'll perhaps it hasn't gotten through to administrators yet, so I might need to take a moment to get it through to administrators.
Okay. I can read it out if you like, so that we can. Are you forwarding it, Councillor? Yeah. So it's that council note the report and seek expressions of interest from the community for a partnership-based approach to providing a natural burial site in Palmerston North. And Councillor Hancock, did you want a second? Yeah, okay. Have you got that? Can yeah, you can start speaking to it, Councillor Barrett, if you want. Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and with my apologies, I thought I'd hit send, which obviously hadn't done. It's been useful to again revisit this and hear officers' advice and what hasn't been explored locally and what hasn't been explored in terms of partnerships with other councils. My reason around bringing this forward is that really this request kind of started with community and in the local community about looking for a local natural burial option. And so I think given that we have explored kind of what we could do in-house and haven't had much luck in that pathway, we've explored what we could do in partner councils, and we do have an option in front of us, but it's you know, some distance away, and I struggle to understand how that would meet the typical expectations of family wanting to lay their deceased family members or friends to rest, and I would expect that it's more than likely they would appreciate having something that was closer to them. So given that we've explored the in-house option, given that we've explored the option with partnering councils, and that's only given us a fairly distant one, it seems to me that it would be logical to explore what, if anything, could be done more locally by working with the community in this regard to see if something could come to fruition. I have no idea if this would actually work or not, but I feel that it's a useful step in terms of exploring the range of options that are in front of us. It seems to me that what we would need would be a willing landowner. We would need somebody that could work with us in terms of an expertise base, and obviously we would need council to go through the process of actually establishing it from a cemetery point of view, as councils are charged with administering cemeteries. So I would like, for the sake of completeness, that we explore this option for a local solution, and if no community partnership comes to fruition, we then know where we're at. But to me, it seems like the logical thing to do to actually fully look at the range of options locally before making any firm, lasting decisions around this. So would ask for your support on that basis so that we can understand what, if any, opportunities there are. I asked the officer around what investigation and exploration had been done in this vein, and indicated that it hadn't been pursued yet because there hadn't been a request or permission from council. So this is granting that request and permission so that that potential avenue can be investigated. So I'd ask for your support in that regard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you were actually next, but I knocked you out of the queue by mistake, so go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, man, it's a long day, isn't it? And we make some peculiar decisions, we really do. I sat here with the mover and the seconder, and we explored it. Actually, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, you mightn't have been in the room. And we explored our existing cemeteries. We then explored other city land options. I can recall Linton came up. I can recall Ashurst came up. And I recall MDC discussions as well. I mean, they're out now. And now we've got a city 45 minutes away, Aramaho and Wanganui. Macra is a similar distance, if we're going to use that as the measure in Wellington to go and view people and visit grave sites. And some others will be very similar as well. So I don't buy that argument, but really I think some councillors probably didn't like the answer. And I appreciate Jean's in the gallery and submitted because she's very passionate about it. But one or two people sought a natural burial in Wanganui at Aramaho. 1 or 2 people a year. That is what we're dealing with. And as we face double-digit rate increases, we're lumbering another report on officers who've already given us the report. Some of us don't like the answer. So look, I'm not supporting this. And if this fails, we'll go back to the original officer recommendation of 2A. It's 45 minutes away. We can see if there is a huge amount of other people that prefer this this natural burial, and maybe revisit at a later date. But we have done all this work, and if this does get over the line in some peculiar way, then I think the report will be very simple, because it'll just be pulled back up again. But really, this is silly. We should just move on. We've got other things to do today. I won't support it.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do support this because I think that's the best and most straightforward way for us to gauge interest in this, given that the report gives us the results of a survey that was conducted in 2010. So I feel that this, going out and seeking expressions of interest, would not only gauge what interest there is in there from the public, but whether or not there was any demand or willingness to actually, take this and drive this forward. So I think it's a practical and fair way to establish demand and likelihood of engagement. Until I have that information, it's very hard to base the demand on a 13-year-old survey when I think things have moved on quite a lot in that time, and particularly knowing that this permanent pine forestry operation going in along our hill country, all out from Kahutarawa Road right down to our boundaries, down Scots Road, and actually continuing down to Otaki, that there is high country that's being planted up that we haven't necessarily explored. So if there is any interest in the community, it will come out and we can gauge, is it emphatic interest? Is it interest that will drive this project? Is it interest that will put money into this project? And that's when we have a better footing to decide whether or not, where this lands. So I will support this now because I think it's a practical way to get an updated view from the community about whether there is demand for it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I might ask a question, I don't know if it's of the mover or of the officers, if that's all right, about this specific recommendation. It was mentioned in the officer's report that it was the Natural Burial Association that, in partnership with another number of councils, had set up, I think 14 of the 21 or whatever it was that exist. Have we had any conversations with the Natural Burial Association as a potential, or just full stop? Have they been a part of this project?
Okay, do you want to direct that to Kathy? Yeah. Oh, Kathy, sorry, we've got a couple of councillors online, so you'll need to use the microphone. Plus people who are listening in online, maybe.
Kathy Devatod, Group Manager, Parks and Logistics. No, we haven't. Just as we have had no discussions with any private landowners, but that would, looking at this recommendation, I'm still trying to get my head around how we would proceed on this, but that would be probably one of the first ports of call we would make.
Are there any other potential partners that you're aware of? Are they the only ones that work in this space?
Not that I am aware of, because what I'm looking at here is not just natural burial, but I'm looking at for the management of a cemetery that isn't on council-owned land or isn't currently administered by council, and I'm just trying to get my head around that.
Correct me from your report, I thought I understood you saying that cemeteries could only be consented on council-owned land, but was that incorrect?
No, it has to be a council. At the moment, under the legislation, cemeteries are administered by councils.
Okay, thank you. All right, I might just briefly speak then, Madam Chair. I've been quite torn on this issue. I'd like to support a natural burial site. The numbers from Wanganui make it very difficult to support a natural burial site. I mean, they're at a cost of, well, based on something between 150 and 300,000, they're at a cost, 11 grand to 21 grand per person over a 12-year period. It's a lot of money to be spending on a very small number of people. In saying that, it is hard to say, oh, well, there's not a lot of demand at the moment, because, well, of course there's not a lot of demand at the moment. There's not a facility to provide it, so there's not going to be demand for, or as much demand for a facility that isn't there. So, I mean, it's a difficult one. I agree with the argument put forward by Councillor Barrett that, if you're visiting your loved ones or your family members, well, actually an hour is a long way to go, 45 minutes is a long way to go, depending on how regularly that individual wants to visit their family member. Some people visit grave sites every week or every month, and so, if we've got people in the community who do want a natural burial site, it would be incumbent on us as a local council to provide that. However, I think I sort of sit in a similar spot to Councillor Zabellin, where the information we're given is quite old. It would be very interesting to see if there is actually a desire for this. But there's not really any partnership options for it other than the Natural Burial Association. And given the active role they seem to have played in setting up these sites in other areas of the country, it seems odd that if they were interested in setting up one up here, they wouldn't have engaged with us through the processes we've been going through since 2008. This has been going on for 14, 15 years. If they wanted to do it, you'd think they would have got involved. So, look, I'm really quite torn on this. A part of me says, yeah, let's go and see if we can get some expressions of interest and set up a partnership and whatnot. But I'm just not sure if it's worth the time and energy and money, particularly given the low usage numbers compared to what was estimated in Wanganui. So I'll listen to the next few speakers. I haven't entirely made up my mind. I'm sorry, Chamber, but I don't think I'll support the recommendation. I think I'll support the Mayor's moving of option 2A.
Thank you. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just a couple of brief comments. And Kathy, thanks very much for all the work that you have done. You've done heaps in terms of trying to find some options for to meet this need. And of course, the need actually is at this point in time actually not entirely known, and we're reliant on some old numbers, as has already been said. I just see this, and I just think the Aramaho option is, for Palmerstonians, that's a fair old trek over there. So for that reason, I'm quite happy to support this. And the other thing I need to say is that this is actually just a step that will provide perhaps an option which we have not considered yet. And the reality is that once we actually go out and actually have a look for some expressions of interest, it may very well be that we get no takers. And we will just simply then just have to circle back to 2A, because that will be the last option open to us. So I'm really just think this is really about, we should actually do this just for the sake of completeness. And the other thing which I think we should just bear in mind too is that we're actually a growing population, so therefore it's likely that the demand for natural burials will in fact actually increase. So for those reasons, I am actually going to support this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mickelad.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share the sentiments that have been expressed by other councillors that are in support of this. But I won't be supporting this. I think if this fails, I'll be supporting option 2A along with the Mayor. And my reasons for simply doing this is simply because, number one, I think we need to maximize the investment already made by Wanganui District Council. I understand that 45 minutes might be a long way for some family members to go and visit their families, but it's still within the Manawatu Wanganui region. And I think option 2A actually avoids an investment in natural burial area in the city. But we talked about demand and that sort of things. And when we look at the bigger cities and some of the cities that have natural burial sites, for example, then the Mayor was quite right with it. He said that, some of them will probably have like 3 or 4 people, for example. I don't want to make light of the fact that these people are deceased or anything, or the sentiments that their family members might feel. But I just feel like spending $11,000 on one person for a natural burial site, which is an enormous cost on us. And also the cost of maintaining the natural burial site as well. Which is it's making it very hard for me as well to sort of support this. The report has already been provided to us by officers. I understand that some members might feel that the information is old, but this is the information that we have at present. And I thank Kathy and the team actually for doing this and for providing us with some options, but I don't see myself supporting this. Just because I strongly feel that we should just maximize the investment already made. We talk about partnering with other people. This includes partnering up as well with Whanganui District Council in doing that. So I'm not gonna support this and support option 2A. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is all of the speakers. So back to you, Councillor Barrett, for right for reply.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And briefly, before we run entirely out of elected members in the chamber, I did want to pick up on a couple of the points made around this, and I have used some quite open language in this recommendation quite deliberately in terms of partnership approaches. I think, yes, there's obviously the Natural Burial Association that could be a natural partner there, but there's potentials around interested landowners as well. And I think ultimately, you need to think about partners more broadly than just the expertise around the natural burial, which is why it's left reasonably open in that regard. In terms of the arguments around it potentially costing a great deal of money, obviously if it got into the spectrum, we would need to reconsider that. We don't actually know at this point whether it would or not, which is again why we should be investigating this. And I would push back on the notion that we shouldn't change things just because something we may not like what's in the report. To be frank, I didn't like what was in the report. Just earlier this meeting, we didn't like something that was in a report, so we went to a different option, and I think that's what our job is as elected members. And what I'd like to be able to ensure is that as a council representing this community, that we've looked at what we can do in terms of delivering on our own basis, which we have done, look at what we can do in terms of partnering with other councils, which we have done, but also look at what we could do, if anything, in terms of partnering with the community. That is the third logical step in investigating the options here. One of the things that I've really enjoyed and appreciate about this community is that we are actually quite inclusive in terms of our cemetery and burial arrangements. There's a great deal of diversity in how people do approach that part of the cycle of life, and I think being as open as possible in terms of models for responding to that makes perfectly good sense. This will simply be a report which will bring us a useful piece of information back, at which point we'll have the full set of options in front of us to make a proper decision. So I'd urge your support so that we can get this investigated.
Thank you. Right, we will take the vote, please. And that is carried, 5 votes for and 4 against. So brings us to the last item, which is the committee work schedule. So I'll just ask the customer officer if there are any comments. No. Okay. Are there any questions about the work schedule? Finally run out of steam. Okay, I will move that we accept the work schedule. Seconded, Councillor Hancock. Any comments? No, let's take it. And that is carried unanimously, 9 votes for and none against. So with that, I'll close the meeting with the closing karakia. Kia puta ki te whaka, ki te ao marama, whakamoia kia tina, homie, huie, taikie. Thank you.